Thank you so much. Good job.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Gaskins. I'm president of the museum, okay? I am the president of the museum. And I just want to welcome everybody here. We're wonderful to see how many. However uncomfortable you are, at least you're going to hear a great speech. And thank you. Just wanted to encourage any of you to come back and see the show that's up here, or take a tour if you're not a member, to become a member. And I want to thank Filio for arranging this, Filio Cushing, and for Michael. And thank you very much for coming, and you certainly drew a big crowd.
Okay, wow, I have never seen so many people in this room. This is fabulous. You need to all come back because this is an amazing museum, okay? Okay, I get the fun job of introducing Michael. And this has amazing meaning for me. In 1965, my family bought a summer house on the top of Spring Street. And way back in the day, the Updikes lived in the Polly Dole house on East Street. And we became fast friends, right? All of us. There are two of us, my maiden name is Wigglesworth, two Wigglesworth, my younger brother Henry and myself, and four of them. But we shared schools. Some of us went to the same high schools, colleges, etc. So it goes on. Michael grew up in Ipswich. He's the third child of Mary and John Updike. He received his BFA from the Mass College of Art and an MFA from Vermont College. Many years ago, a Pingree classmate started a company you probably all have heard of called Mariposa. And Michael joined Mariposa and became the head designer. And probably many of the things you're using at your house were designed by Michael. I got a whole bunch of wedding presents that were designed by you that I love and that I use today. Anyway, Michael serves on the John Updike Literary Trust, has presented at many John Updike Society conferences, and he has two adult sons, Trevor and Sawyer, and is married to the charming Olga Updike, and who is a Philip Roth scholar, which is very interesting. Anyway, it's really brings me great joy to introduce Michael Updike to you.
Thank you all for coming. I know it's cold and everything, and the impulse is to stay at home, so I really appreciate the large crowd and showing. A couple words before I start with the letters. I'm wearing this, we'll say it, garish tie with a bull and a bear. And this was given to my father, John Updike, in sort of the New Millennium series of Wall Street. And he was asked to come to New York and ring the bell. He did that on January 3rd of 2000. And I'm all appreciative, too, that everyone came here during Super Bowl Sunday. I know it can start at brunch and not end until midnight. So I thank you. And those that want further Updike reading, I'll refer you to the story called Grandparenting, in which my father and stepfather and mother all drive to Hartford, Connecticut to assist, quote, the birth of my sister Liz's first child, Anof Kabla. Yeah, so they all go to witness the birth of John Anof Kabla, Liz's son, who's now 41 years old. And that was sometime in late January, which just shows you how the Super Bowl's been pushed back further and further with more commercial times, etc. So I brought a little show and tell, and I'm going to precede my first letter with some show and tell. This is a drawing that my father obtained. It's by the famous New Yorker cartoonist artist Saul Steinberg. And it says, "To John Updike, best wishes, Saul Steinberg." And it's dated 1945. And if you do the math, my father was 13 years old when he got that. So you wonder how a boy at the end of World War II, who's living in the middle of Pennsylvania, could get such a piece of artwork. And this letter will explain it. It is to Mr. Harold Gray, who's another cartoonist of Orphan Annie, and it's dated January 2nd, 1948. Dear Mr. Gray, I don't suppose that I'm being original when I admit that Orphan Annie is, and has been for a long time, my favorite comic strip. There are many millions like me. The appeal of your comic strip is an American phenomenon that has affected the public for many years and will, I hope, continue to do so for many more. I admire the magnificent plotting of Annie's adventures. They are just as adventure strips should be. Fast-moving, slightly macabre, occasionally humorous, and above all, they show a great deal of the viciousness of human nature. I am very fond of the gossip and the street scenes you frequently use. Contrary to comic strip tradition, the people are not pleasantly benign, but gossiping, sadistic, and stupid, which is just as it really is. Your villains are completely black, and Annie and crew are practically perfect, which is how it should be. To me, there is nothing more annoying in a strip than to be in the dark as to who is the hero and who is the villain. I like the methods in which you polish off your evildoers. One of my happiest moments was spent in gloating over some hideous child who had been annoying Annie and then toppled into the wet cement of the dam being constructed. I hate your villains to the point where I could rip them from the page. No other strip arouses me so. Your draftsmanship is beyond reproach. All this well-deserved praise is leading up to something, of course, and the catch is a rather big favor I want to ask you to do for me. I need a picture to alleviate the blankness of one of my bedroom walls. So, could you possibly send me a little autographed sketch of Annie that you have done yourself? I realize that you probably have some printed cards you send to people like me, but could you maybe do just a quick sketch by yourself? Nothing fancy, just what you have done yourself. If you cannot do this, and I really wouldn't blame you, will you send me anything you like? Perhaps an original comic strip. Whatever I get will be appreciated, framed, and hung. Sincerely, John Updike, Alverston, Pennsylvania. Okay, now, a couple years later, this one is to the New Yorker. Honey. Gentlemen, I would like some information on those little filler drawings you publish, and I presume buy. What size should they be, mounted or not? Are there any preferences as to subject matter, weight of cardboard, and technique? I will appreciate any information you give me, for I would like to try my hand at it. Sincerely, John Updike. And what you see there are little filler drawings, as he called them. They're called decks. And he did a lot for his Harvard Lampoon work. You can look at the cartooning skills there. And he was also submitting stories and poems and light verse all throughout high school and all through college. He's out of college now. This is September 1950. And he's writing to his English professor and woman who helped him along with his literary quest. Mrs. Lewis, much, or is it many, thanks for the songs of youth. My mother, who never did understand my apathy towards the American Poetry Society, was delighted in your kindness, and even I was once again stirred by the sight of my work in print. It is indeed an interesting book. Perhaps the most interesting thing about it is the clever way the publishers, with the low cunning characteristic of those who print my stuff, obscured the entire point of my poem. By some exclusive process, they have hollowed out each punctuation mark until it is but a shadow of its former self. Since my little effort is dependent on the punctuation used, I suffer a good bit. Spacing is ingenious too. It gives to the printed page the quality of a conversation between a chronic stutterer and a man trying to talk and remove bits of celery from between his teeth simultaneously. Thank you once more for the surprising and welcome gift. Okay. All right. Moving quickly along through his life. He is now at college, and this is his first letter home. Dear, and he sometimes addresses it Plowvillians, which he grew up in Plowville, Pennsylvania, but he has his mother, father, grandmother, and grandfather in there, and this time he includes some of the animals. Dear mother, father, grandpa, grandma, Chipper, Johnson, and all the ships at sea, Harvard is a difficult place in which to write a letter. It would seem that the number of students in Hollis Hall greatly outnumbers the number of rooms. In fact, the overflow seems to be all in my room. I cannot explain why this is. My roommate surely does all he can to discourage callers, a novel attitude that most of them find strangely alluring. I will try not to dwell on my roommate at unbearable length, but perhaps you might be interested. He too writes, although not terribly much. He has the nagging feeling that nothing he will write will be good enough, and consequently, rather than put down an inept word, he plays tennis. He claims he wants to be a writer, but in the short time I've been here, he has done nothing about it. This does not indicate to him, at least, any inferiority to me, a mass producer. In fact, it seems to be the mark of a fastidiousness that I lack. Moody would be a kindly adjective. Nasty might be better. Not that I dislike him. His faults are a pleasant compliment to mine. Although perhaps the pairing up of two writers might be an interesting an experiment as rubbing two tomcats together. I wish that he had brought along some of his work. He says it stinks, and I would be very grateful for some confirmation. At any rate, he has dismissed my work with an unconscious sneer and has persistently prevented me from getting any work done. There are 3 people here besides myself, all of them talking. The letter is a difficult thing, as I had anticipated. There is little to say, but I am happy and see no reason why I shall stop being. I am no longer scared, and I was homesick once, only after you left. I was glad to get your letter. Write soon and forward my mail. I have gotten none. Johnny. Okay, I put in some Ipswich letters. This is an Ipswich letter, which needs a little explaining. Due to my grandfather's parish, a woman who had connections to Good Ale's orchard then, gave them a little cottage, which is way in the back of the apple orchard. The public doesn't really see it that much, but there's like a house and cottage back there. So that's where they honeymooned. Another issue my father had was psoriasis, and because of that he was sort of plagued with embarrassment and never learned to swim until he went off to Harvard. And there's a myth that a large part of money was given by a Titanic survivor to Harvard, saying everyone has to learn to swim to graduate. But I researched it, and it was just he had his freshman physical course, which involved learning to swim. Dear mother, father, grandpa, grandma, Jolson, and Copper, the Ipswich leg of our honeymoon is over. The house in Ipswich, besides being craftily hidden behind tall, cool, and kindly trees, was chock full of goodies, edible and otherwise. We ate the edible ones and contemplated the others with the pop-eyed delight traditionally assigned newly made couples in Hollywood comedies. Mary, it seems, plays croquet well. I bet she does. And much of our time was spent in the back lawn knocking wooden spheres about. Really? No. Eric Wentworth sent us a fancy-bound edition of E.B. White's Stuart Little, which we read to each other aloud. On Saturday, we A, bicycled into Ipswich and bought food, B, pedaled to the Ipswich beach where Mary, clad in a bright blue bathing suit, immersed herself in the throbbing Atlantic, and after a bit persuaded me to do the same. Much to my surprise, I remembered a little bit about how to swim and enjoyed myself thoroughly. After that first dreadful plunge into a deep that was so cold as well as briny, the resultant sunburn did much to startle my psoriasis. The customary red on white polka dot scheme of my legs was inverted to a white on scarlet, modeled by a dab of Noxzema. 2 more sunburns like that and my bane will be gone. And years later, when they wanted to move out of New York City, they chose Ipswich primarily for the beach, Crane's Beach. So now he's graduated from college, and during the summer post-graduation, he got 2 poems accepted by the New Yorker and 1 short story, Friends from Philadelphia. So he's writing to Catherine White, who is his editor at the New Yorker, but she's also the wife of E.B. White, author Stuart Little. So, dear Mrs. White, thank you so much for your kind words about Friends from Philadelphia. The odd thing is that those 2 first-person stories nobody liked were composed after Friends. A holdup due to Mr. Hoffelotter's vacation made the order seem reversed. I once saw a movie in which a chimpanzee, let loose in a laboratory, proceeded to mix, by accident, with his elbows, some sort of highly potent elixir. I know now how he felt when they wanted him to stir up a second batch. The bonus for quality plan, though, sets a properly optimistic tone, and I am grateful to you for sending it to me. I go to England the day after tomorrow. Brooding about the venture has produced the enclosed poem. I'm afraid you won't be at the New Yorker office when I call tomorrow, so this will be the time to tell you, A, my middle initial is not F, but H. B, the patient and abundant attention you have paid to my offerings this summer is one of the nicest things that has happened to me in my brief and lucky life. Sincerely, John Up. Brief and lucky life. So, we're going to flash forward 28 days, and there's a little tension brewing between my father and Catherine White. I have to go to my show and tell now. Oh, and this. Okay. Yes. If you haven't seen the movie, I'm sure you've read George Bernard Shaw. And he is notorious for colons and semicolons. He really uses them very liberally instead of commas. And the Fowler's book, the heavy one, I just wanted you to see the girth of it. And it's a substantial book to travel, to England for a year with. And the tension, there's a little pushback to Catherine White about punctuation, and then she asks something that he sort of finds a little presumptuous as well. So, dear Mrs. White, I am very sorry that I haven't got this proof back to you sooner. It came to me less than an hour ago. It was stamped with 6 cents, obviously under the impression that it was bound for somewhere in the States. New paragraph. Yes, I do own a copy of Fowler, but along with my parents, pet cat, rubber basketball, and other steadying influences, I left it in America. Colons tend to be a weakness with me ever since I took a course in the works of George Bernard Shaw. They looked so pert and snappy somehow. I always think of a semicolon as dragging 1 foot. I fear in poetry I use punctuation improperly to indicate the degree of stop I want. Thank you for correcting me. My selling you something very timely from England is a pleasing notion, And of course, if it should happen, you have my permission to do minor editing without consulting me. I hope our concepts of minor editing correspond. I should think that in a poem, the change of any word would be major. In prose, I trust you to draw the line between merely syntactical and fundamental alteration. Airmail from New York City to me takes 2 or 3 days, only slightly longer than the average time between New York City and Vermont or Pennsylvania. I appreciate that in any case, the New Yorker is extraordinarily considerate of its authors, and I, for one, am grateful. So, then make up with her. So. All right, this one I put in here. It shows they've been in New York for like 2 years, and they're finally being concrete about what they need to do to move out of New York and into Ipswich. And I think it just shows the contrast of the lifestyles that he's leaving and what he will have. And Little Violet is at the end of Heartbreak Road on 133. It's a little cottage there with a barn, etc. And it's part of what's now the Raymond estate. In his day, there was a guy, the Burridges owned it, the whole property. And he commented on that just to tell you how far back in time we are. The letter is 1957, and he writes in the margins, Little Violet Burridges, butlers, 5 courses, ladies and men separate in rooms afterward. Very old room. And you know, there's a Victorian tradition where the woman would recede to a parlor and have women talk while the men with cigars had men talk. So here we go. Dear Plowvillians, that's his mother, grandmother. Such an action-packed week. I can't believe I forgot to write you yesterday. Last Monday, I went up on the train to Cambridge. Anne Karnofsky drove me out of college, out to Ipswich, and a tall, fur-coated, initially austere lady named Madame Post drove us around to look at apartments and houses. Only one apartment, huge but richly furnished, and the nervous owner wanted $200 per month. Next we looked at Little Violet, a 5-room house with barn, carport, study, and 2 acres for $150. We never got inside Violet, it being locked, and the real estate agent lacking keys. I just looked into the windows. I couldn't see much except the little room with white shelves and white marble floor that I envision as my study. The barn seemed very pleasant too. Then we looked at some houses to buy, all of them full of young pioneer women raising dozens of children in the midst of more litter and television sets than I ever saw. We are taking Little Violet. The lease should arrive soon and will move around April 1st. Seems scarcely credible. A new paragraph. The reality of it didn't dawn until after one day of his being inaccessible. Mr. Sean is the head of the New Yorker. I saw Mr. Sean to tell him I was quitting. The hands trembled even now thinking of it. He was sweet as a mint patty about it, though, and said I could come back any time. Mrs. White took me out to lunch today after writing that my quitting was a crushing blow to the magazine and to her personally, and was full of fun. Right off the bat, I met J.D. Salinger, who was having lunch in the Algonquin with Sean, and then at meal's end, Mr. and Mrs. Thurber came in. Mr. Thurber said he was glad to see me. I forgot what I said. Nothing much, I guess. And you all know that's James Thurber of My World, Welcome to It. Cartoons. Okay. So, we're still in Ipswich at the transition. It's a long letter, but I'm just going to read the 2 Ipswich parts. It is January 25th, 1958. Friday, we bought a house. Little did we think upon arising this would be so. It was a house in Ipswich, advertised at $20,000. We went in the morning. It kind of hangs over the street at a bend of East Street. going down to the wharf, is white, has no front yard, and at present is divided into 2 parts, with one half rented. There are 14 rooms, all but 2 of them the size of closets. But good for stashing children in. And it can be made one house by breaking 2 little walls, one separating 2 kitchens, the other separating 2 closets. Huge living room. Walking distance to schools, churches, stores, movie places, riverside, etc. Before sundown, it was ours for $18,500. I scarcely got any writing at all done that day out of sheer fright. That same feathery, scared feeling when you're having a baby or getting married. Please come this summer and tell us everything is all right. New paragraph. We take ownership March 1st and expect to be in April 1st. Furniture galore needed, which we hope to get a piece at a time every Christmas, like silverware. There is a little backyard to this place that runs uphill rapidly into a few scruffy pines. No estate to manage as here. On the other hand, no place outside the windows to sunbathe either. But we love it. It's hard to describe why exactly. It's nice being among people again, for one thing, and all the walking will do. The house was built in 1670 and has a lot of history, evidently. The cellar looks like a forest, so many cedar posts and splintering trusses and metal hooks threading the house together. The front is white, but the back is red. The house is rather wide and only 2 rooms deep. 2 of everything, of course. 2 stoves, 2 refrigerators, 2 furnaces, 2 electric bills. The whole transaction suggests that we will be in Ipswich for a year or 2 longer. Okay. All right, so we're up to 1960 now, and he's in the process, and at the second letter he's already finished writing Rabbit Run, which did not get a friendly reception from his minister friend who lived up the street, Goldie Sherrill, B, his mother-in-law, Mrs. Antoinette Daniels Pennington, who wrote to him, and due to time, I'm going to choose Mrs. Daniels Pennington's letter, but the Goldie letter is equally good. She called herself, or we called her Mum Mouse, and she put little names to people, and she called my father Johnny Jump Up. Dear Mrs. Pennington, thanks for your letter, as warm and sprightly as always. I guess you just don't like my ex-basketball players, and should be relieved to know, therefore, that having passed them through a poem, a short story, and a novel, as far as I know, I'm through with them. Your reaction to Rabbit, while somewhat severe, is not inappropriate. I don't think he's especially stupid, but otherwise your adjectives seem fair. And in calling him a grown-up child, you have unwittingly, I'm sure, described us all. I don't attempt as a writer to control the reader's reactions to my people. All I try and do is present them as truly as I can. I'm glad you liked Lucy and Ruth. Myself, I like them all, especially Kruppenbach, the Lutheran minister. As to your worry about Liz, I must confess that is one aspect of my problems that hadn't occurred to me. In general, I think, looking back at my own childhood, that we should be allowed to read whatever we care to read. No doubt we get some starts doing it, but better to get them than avoid them. Of course, I can't picture Liz at 13 the way you can, having raised 2 daughters. I can't even picture her reading my books. Marquand somewhere complained that his children never read any of his books. I don't think that the book, if it's disturbing, would disturb her any more whether I or someone else wrote it. After all, it's not as if I ever had made the high school basketball team or lived in Mount Judge. Anyway, I guess being a writer's daughter has some disadvantage, although being a writer's daughter is probably easier than being a writer's mother-in-law. Even being a writer has its disadvantages. Trying to tell the truth is not really a welcome service, but I haven't figured out any other way to go about my business. You wonder why I had to write the book. I had to write it because writing is my vocation, and I chose to write this particular story because it contained in images that were alive for me a problem or conflict that seemed real and important. I don't think that the moral of the book is very unexceptional, the moral being that pure self-seeking, pure following of inner light does cause eruptions in the social web and therefore pain. As to sex, sex is important to Harry as it is to many other young men his age, and therefore it is important in the book. I don't see why sexual encounters should not be described as fully as any other sort of encounter between people. They contain just as much nuance. I'm sorry that through the accident of marriage you have been thrown into close familial conjunction with a writer you don't really like. Honestly, I don't ask that you read me. I send you the books as a token of my esteem and affection. You needn't open them. Love, Johnny Jump Up. When are you going to read? A little bit? Oh, you're going to read? Not now. I'll go through this one first. All right, so we're going ahead to 1968, and he published another book which has a little bit of controversy to it, Couples. And the Ipswich Chronicle first had a Lovell Thompson review, and Lovell Thompson was a publisher and reviewer, and a native of Ipswich. Mrs. David Smith, she wrote a letter expressing, I wish that his talents had been redirected. Iggy Robichaud in the I Spy Ipswich Today reported that Updike would receive as much as $600,000 for the movie rights to Couples. I think it was more like $400,000, but it's still a very big number for 1968. And then, and I see him in the audience, Joshua Fauser. His mother, Judy Fauser, wrote a defense of Couples in the Chronicle as well. So there was a lot of back and forth there. And then Kitty Robertson, who was a very strong Ipswich presence and usually talked town politics, described it as reading forbidden trash. Nothing funny or tragic in the novel except the decline of a promising talent. Also on this Ipswich Chronicle face, they had his cover on the front, which he described as my fat and sinister face. And never trust Billy Wasserman, the owner of the Chronicle at the time. He also printed that the Updikes were dining at the White House that night with Lyndon Johnson. And if anyone wants to know what they have, I printed up there. The only sort of remarkable thing was how common the wine is. Oh, madame for dessert. So that's here for you to read. And here's the letter, which he kind of compliments, a finger for niceness. To the editor, I am sure that I am not the only Ipswich citizen who hopes that the Chronicle will soon conclude its all too full coverage of my recent novel, Couples. But I want to thank Lovell Thompson for his fine review, a review that, in the exuberant, witty expression and in its humane sensitivity to my inventions, would have done credit in any national publication. And I thank Mrs. Fauser and friend for the gallant defense of the minority cause, and Iggy Robichaud for her alert attention to my cinematic fortunes as reported in film news, and Mrs. David Smith for her suggesting that I write another novel. and thank my friend Kitty Robertson for devoting to me precious space stolen from her customary topic of town government. Her aesthetic criticisms must be borne. A book is its own defense and will not speak to everyone. An author hopes for an honest livelihood and an ideal reader, and perhaps a personal acquaintance is barred from ideal readership by the many factual accidents that necessarily intrude. Mrs. Robertson's flat and scandalous blithe allegations that Tarbox is Ipswich and its characters are my friends and must be flatly denied. As people who have read it know, the towns have Boston between them and differ in countless details aside from the qualitative differences that one is a fictional invention shaped to fit a certain preconceived music and morale, and the other is real growing and various community that will survive this spring's floods and all of us. The Tarboxians are not real people, but conglomerations of glimpses and guesses and thefts and slips of the pen into which I, in author's usual desperate endeavor, have tried to breathe life. They seemed alive to me, and in that case became my friends. But I never confused them with reality, and I think that no one else should. Speaking of Roth, Philip Roth, here's a letter to Philip Roth. And Roth, you can tell in the letters volume, that Roth is writing these gushingly, complimentary letters to Updike, and he's slightly embarrassed every time he writes back to Roth and tries to compliment him back. But Roth had just written Updike about Rabbit Raid 2, and Roth has just published a small little, what do we call it? Too small to be a novella. A little essay titled The Breast, and it's sort of Kafka, Gogol's Nose-esque kind of tale. Woody Allen, everything you wanted about sex, when they had to catch it with a large bra. That sort of echoes of Philip Roth's breast. Dear Philip, Mary and I stumbled back from Africa, and your kind letter about Redu was amid the mail as a jewel amid offal. Thank you. Did you notice the similarities of Rabbit, Stavros, and Skeeter's discussions of Vietnam with the evening you, I, and Taper spent in a shack on the vineyard some years ago? What a blessed relief this truce is. And not to give it tit for tat pun, but we both admired and enjoyed the breast, which I took to be a persuasively frightening metaphor for our human condition, ignominiously stuck in oblongs of yearning flesh as we are. Your new book, In Galleys, just came. I look forward to reading it. If you ever go to the vineyard anymore, we'll be there in August. Warm regards, John. I forgot to tell you that Philip Roth, my father, and his New Yorker writer Bernard Taper had a three-way argument about the Vietnam War. My father playing the hawk role in protecting Johnson, which was sort of an unpopular stance at that point. And so my father fictionalized that in his book, Rabbit Redu, and gave his characters the same argument. So that's that. Oh, and here's a letter to a reviewer, Mr. Aldridge, who gave my father a sort of a scathing review of an earlier novel, Of the Farm. Dear Mr. Aldridge, I guess I've recovered from your review of the Farm, but it was nip and tuck for a while, with intravenous glucose and months of staying in quiet in a dark room. And I'm still too weak to do anything like the conference with German writers that you describe. Good luck with your scheme, however, and forgive me for declining. Sincerely, John Updike. Okay, we'll skip. All right, this is to Miranda Updike, who's in the audience. Sort of like haiku. I think it's a postcard from the Maidstone Club, East Hampton, New York. Dear Miranda, the beach is enormous and almost too hot to walk on. All the New Yorkers stand around in crowded little bunches, as if they were standing on a subway. Love, Dad. Okay, this one is to Michael Updike, yours truly. And it's written on Pineapple Beach Resort Stationery, and that's St. Thomas, Virgin Islands, 1977. This is to let you know that I'm thinking of you in this hard week of yours, and that I wish you well at Pingree as you align yourself with the upward and outward path. Here the sunshine and easy living are decisively qualified by the need to write my name no less than 2,000 times each day. I calculated today that John Updike written 26,000 times equals a line between 2 and 3 miles long. Love to all, Deb. Dear John, I thought you should be told that Bill Judson has died this February 28th. He was the youngish man whose marriage to Liz, you and Mary came all that way to attend. It was right here. And who you met once or twice in Boston days when we went out to Ipswich. He admired you greatly, reading your books a number of times over, and greatly enjoyed conversations with you that you may have totally forgotten. You were, I think, his ideal of what a Northeastern American gentleman should be. But he didn't have the willpower or motivation to follow your example and kick the bottle. He drank himself to death at the age of 37, is what it amounts to. Liz had left him last fall and more or less foresaw this outcome. She seems very brave and cheerful at this moment, though what the whole experience has done to her inside, I don't know. The thing is, though he gave her a bad life for 2 years, there was something fine and even gallant about him, which now that he is dead, comes back with painful vividness. Regards, John. You okay there, Liz? Okay, so I'm just going to go through quick ones. Trevor Meek stole my letter here, which is to the Ipswich Chronicle. The music teacher said the children weren't ready to march in the Jimmy Fund Day parade. And then Bob O'Keefe he was the English teacher, he had his students read an Atlantic Monthly article which had the word mother fornicator, but not fornicator, in it. So, to the editor, what is going on in the Ipswich schools? 1 week the music director is dismissed for declining to march unrehearsed youngsters in a local parade. The next, a veteran English teacher is dismissed for directing the attention of his advanced class towards an article in New England's revered Atlantic Monthly concerning a keenly contemporary problem and employing unavoidably a contemporary expression. As a school son, I know how demoralizing an entire faculty such terrorism must be. As an Ipswich parent, I deplore these administrative blows at an educational system that, in the 12 years my family has lived here, has become increasingly sensitive and lively. As a taxpayer, I wonder why we should invest in an embarrassing legal battle that can only result in Mr. Keefe's eventual vindication. John Updike. There's that. Martha? No. Sorry, I had a very long, complex, convoluted fight my father and Martha had, and it's just too hard to explain. This one's sort of funny. Kurt Vonnegut had a photographer wife, Jill Kremitz, and her life and living was made mostly photographing authors. And this is what my father wrote to his wife, who was a very private person. I, John Updike, hereby swear that I will not permit Jill Kremitz Vonnegut of 228 East 48th Street, New York City, to come to 675 Hale Street, Beverly Farms, Mass., known popularly as Haven Hill. Signed, John Updike. All right, this is cleanup. Apparently he said something on a video that was aired. 10 years later, Norman Mailer heard about it and sort of confronted him in a McDowell colony event. Dear Norman, I honestly don't remember being on television in the last 6 months or saying that any of your work is trashy. But if I was and did, I must have had Legal Tough Guys and the Monroe book in mind as being trashy in a kind of cheerful and robust way, appropriate to the American trashiness they and we all have to deal with. There is much of your work I haven't read, and I have never sat down and worked up a book review. But when you come to my mind on television or off, it is a model of energy and courage in a realm not notable for either. I especially admire the way you, though a New Yorker born and bred, have taken all America as your subject, and the way you boldly wrote yourself out of the big, well-publicized financial hole a few years ago. And the way, as in Prisoner of Sex, you were able to be honest about texts and emotions and follow that honesty. Well, may it be that, and may you still accept my sincere, warm regards. John. Okay. Skip. They're just like two involved. Ones were skipping. And one was silly where the Nike company kept sending him sneakers. Here's his views on the editorialship of Tina Brown, who took over the New Yorker for about 3 years or so. And he's writing it to his retired editor, Bill Maxwell of the New Yorker. Dear Bill, thanks for making Brooke's wedding out so vivid so that I feel less if I had missed it. The last time I danced my heart out was at Miranda's wedding, and Martha thought I looked like an old fool. Roger English, Catherine White's son. Roger called me and said Tina Brown had nothing for the first issue, and maybe a story by me would be nice, so I sat down and wrote one to order. Her issues are so scattered and jumpy that one wants to write for them, just to calm them down. At least she makes me feel welcome in these last days of Pompeii while the brimstone rains down and the ground underfoot shudders. Love, John. Okay, and there's a real sweet one we're going to get to. Oh, here is kind of grouchy. You like it. To the editor. I can't believe you're cutting Spider-Man. The only comic strip in the globe, except for Doonesbury half the time, worth reading. Do think again in making way for what sounds like the more jejune set of unfunny panels pitched at the non-existent, or at least non-reading, X generation. And whatever happened to Mac Divot, the most helpful set of golf tips I ever read. So following that letter, the Boston Globe reinstated Spider-Man into it, and my father received this postcard from Stan Lee. Many thanks for keeping me from walking the plank at the Boston Globe. To everyone else, you're just a great writer, but to me, you're a fellow superhero. If you ever need me, just wiggle a web. Your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. Okay. Two more. Dear David, bravely done and thank you. As you said, it was an unusual position to be thrust into. Who but Philia could have got us all there? Your fragment of a story was fascinating to listen to, not the least by me. The concrete post disintegrating one by one, the narrator heroic, instant decision to take the blame upon himself, the leaden response of the remarkable inept 15-year-old driver. It goes on and on, praising that story, which you can find in Old Girlfriends. So, all right. We're almost there, Filio. All right, a librarian in Connecticut wrote my father asking him to write his son, who was also suffering from psoriasis. Dear Christopher O'Donnell, I know that psoriasis can be annoying and embarrassing, but there are many more treatments now than when I was 9 years old. and more to come. In 10 years, perhaps an easy cure will be developed. But for now, submit to what cures there are, including moderate sunshine, and be grateful that it doesn't hurt, and that people with psoriasis are generally pretty healthy otherwise. In Latin, it is called morbus fortiorum, the disease of the strong. Be strong and have a happy holiday. Sincerely, John Updike. Okay, and now I'm two, very short. Dear Mary, just think, today would have been our 50th wedding anniversary. I guess it is anyway. Thank you for being such a lovely bride and for all the rest. Love, John. So, and there is a very nice one to Bob Waite, the dentist downtown, who did a lot of drilling, etc. I'll read it because Michael McGarty is here. His father is mentioned, but I'll skip the part about his teeth rotting and all that. Dear Bob Waite, it was a nice surprise to hear from you. I haven't seen the poker piece yet, nor has life sent me a check. But I've heard from one of my poker buddies, the one I call Bad Loser, and he was very jolly about it. I'd forgotten that you'd ever played. If we could have a list of all the full rolls of these almost 50 years, we'd have enough for a telephone book. Bob McGarty is still famous in our annals for having set aside a certain amount of money, and when he had lost it, getting up and leaving early, right out the door. Bill Keyworth once sneaked a tape recorder under the table, and the playback was an utterly astonishing mess of inane muttering. As the group thinned with death in Florida, we took in a number of Rockport members, and their recent withdrawal due to death and the domestic problems of aging threatened to kill the group at last. But Charlie Tesaurus has reached down into his bank of Ipswich acquaintances and managed to staff a game the other night. The group goes on and continues to go on. Charlie Tesaurus asked me to join after my father died. And we have two members of the group here with us, Bob O'Keefe and Rick Silverman. And Michael McGarty did play. Who else? Death to David Remnick. David, your beautifully generous and warm letter made me begin to cry. First when my wife read it to me at the hospital over the phone, and now when I can read it holding it in my hand. I fell in love with the New Yorker when I was about 11 and never fell out, and never got used to the heavenly sensations of being in print there. I know, of course, that my niche in the canyon walls the magazine has carved through American journalism, literature, and comic art is a mere scratching, but I have taken an inordinate pride in it and huge pleasure in continuing to scratching away during your editorship. As to me, the Cheever Review may be my last, but who knows? The journey, as they say, with lung cancer is pretty much one way, but with some loops in it maybe, and the remissions under chemo. As with life itself in its broad outlines, there's only submitting to it and trying to be grateful for what, as much in my life does, warrant gratitude. With great respect and affection, John. Yes, I rehearsed something, and I didn't give enough credit to the editor of this book, who spent 10 years collecting the letters and looking, and he described it once as like asking people for their 5-year-old tax forms. They're somewhere in their attic, but they won't get it. And he kept calling us or emailing us with questions, and one of the letters in it said, "What is the Alice's?" And because we're in Ipswich, I feel I should answer Jim Shift in an Ipswich accent. Jim, you want to know what Alice's is? That's that little store down by the wharf. That's where you get your sea worms and stuff. And all the people coming off the neck, they stop there in the morning for their coffee. As children, of course, we went for the penny candy. And you got 5 pieces for a nickel. And you get your hot ball, and then your squirrel, and a caramel cream. I used to turn them inside out and eat the sugar first. a Twizzler, and then you get 2 milk balls for a penny. And Alice, she's a solid woman, not very high, but she made up for it. She had her hair up in this like beehive, and the curlers and everything. She was an original. And now there's a serious question.
I met your dad first many, many years ago when he was at a fundraiser at the Museum of Science in Boston. And he was giving several readings from his poems.
Mm-hmm.
And they were breathtaking. It just blew me away. This was decades ago. So I went up to him afterwards and asked him how we could obtain his poems or what books were available. He said, oh, I'll never publish those poems. And then I've just lost track of that over the years. Have you published poems that I've not found?
He had a side thing where he would write poems for special occasions, and I'm just wondering if some of those were to that event. Like my first wedding, I got one, Miranda has one, her birthday things, and those have never been published. And they've been, they could be collected, but they're not. But he does have anthologies of all his published poetry. Library of America has one, and there's a collected poetry book, I think, that came out in '93 or something. Endpoint. Oh, and he had a lot of dying poems. The first thing he did when he was diagnosed was at MGS hospital was he started writing poems again. And there's some beautiful but morbid imagery in it, sort of talking about the morphine being like a cul-de-sac that you go into, and it's a very enjoyable cul-de-sac. But yeah, that's all. Yes, Martha. Martha.
The childhood letters, how did you get copies of those? Did he keep copies, or where did those come from?
My grandmother kept every letter there. My mother kept every letter. I mean, that's how we have the dinner menu for the White House. You just saved everything. And it's a lot, and so that's where we got those. And my mother told us early, like when we went off to college, save your father's letters. So I saved them as best I can. There's still a few, mostly grouchy ones, that I couldn't find.
The very first letter in the book, written to his father when his father was in a hospital in Philadelphia with some ulcer or something or other. He wrote him a rather funny little get better soon letter, and I found that one in a box of my grandfather's basically love letters to his wife written in the 20s when they were both in college. But she had inserted this letter to go with another one she had sent to her husband in this hospital in Philadelphia. So it's a very small letter written in pencil.
Yeah. I mean, so the ones that you see, it's amazing that they're still alive or found, and consequently, the library has a lot of letters written to John Updike, but not one that he wrote back to this person, but he obviously did, and those are probably thrown out when someone dies and they clear out the estate or something, and they disappear very easily. Yes.
So in the process of helping to gather these letters and reading the book, do you have new insights into your dad?
No, I always thought he was nicer than he's portrayed by reviewers. I mean, the affairs are sort of jaw-dropping, what was going on in the 60s. And I had an inkling, but not that many, and not as concrete. And the other thing is they were so open about it and so forgiving about it too. He was sleeping with this guy's wife, and he says, well, come on over for drinks and we'll talk about it. And things like that. And so, but the scars still run deeply through all the children of the volleyball group. I mean, we have reunions calling ourselves Children of Benign Neglect. And they all, some are affected more deeply than others. So, Yes.
Yeah, your father wrote about Ted Williams. Are there any baseball reference letters that you came across?
There's one that Sean, I believe, who's the head of the New Yorker then, where he says, I'm writing a piece on Ted Williams. You probably won't like it, but I'm going to send it along anyway. And that was really his only baseball one. And he wrote a lot more, like on golf. And he was always getting propositioned to write something about Tiger Woods by Golf Magazine or something, which he probably did do a few times, not too often. So
He was asked to write a biography of Ted Williams after the story. I don't know if the letter's in the book, but there was a letter explaining to the would-be editor why he didn't have much more to say about Ted Williams, and he would let the piece stand as it was.
yeah, and Ted Williams invited him to go fishing. He wrote a letter declining, very nicely declining. It would be wasted on me. I don't fish. So, One last one. Yes?
How daunting of a task was this to collect all these letters and try to...
Oh, it's horrible. In the introduction, I mean, my stepmother set this up with this man named Jim Shift, who was in Updike Society, and he wrote his thesis on Updike, PhD, and he really contemplated hard whether he really wanted to spend the next, what he thought was going to be 5 years on this project. It ended up more like 10. And he'd have to go to, the knowledge. He'd have to go to Harvard and get my father's letters, and then go to wherever Norman Mailer's letters are and read them, so he could understand what's going on in the correspondence. And that, with every other writer, reviewer, editor, and just know what's happening in the whole literary scene from 1955 to 2008. And yeah, it was daunting. And then to write the notes, which explain it all to us, is this other monumental task, which he said, I don't know why, I just love reading your father's letters. So, And he's actually probably going to write a biography on John Updike, just because he has so much knowledge of him up in his brain. Yes.
Thank you.
All right, I want to thank Philly out here. She's organized this and the other. And if you think she's good at this, wait till you have her sell your house. Good. So,
Please join us for a reception. Come introduce yourself. Why don't you be in the reception room?
Okay.
Join us for a reception. Come meet Michael. Come buy a book. Also, the Ipswich Museum did not charge admission for this. So any donations, there's going to be a person in a basket at the door as you leave, would be more than welcome. So thank you so much. It's great to see everybody, and thank you for coming.